All right, everyone. So welcome to Huddle Chats. These are 45-minute conversations that I have with industry experts about key trends in healthcare. I'm Jared Dashevsky. I'm co-founder of Healthcare Huddle, which is a weekly healthcare newsletter breaking down digital health trends, policy trends, insurance trends for about 30,000 health professionals. I'm also an internal medicine resident in New York City. So when I'm not in the hospital, I'm doing stuff for Healthcare Huddle. If you're asking how I'm here today at noon on Tuesday, I'm on vacation, and I spend my vacation doing Healthcare Huddle, which is nice. In today's chat, millions raised but no proof, we'll be talking about a new institution that launched called the Peterson Health Technology Institute that aims to be the independent evaluator of digital health companies in regards to clinical effectiveness and economic impact. And I'll get into this more, but we're at an inflection point in digital health where funding is now scarce and purchasers are reevaluating their contracts with digital health companies, and we need a way to evaluate the thousands of digital health companies out there. I'm very fortunate to have Lindsey Schapiro with me today. She is on the inside of Peterson Health Technology Institute. She's senior manager, started over the summer. Previously, she did healthcare strategy at NRC, which is one of the largest nonpartisan research organizations in the United States. And she recently obtained her MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, where she focused on healthcare strategy, venture capital, and healthcare entrepreneurship. Lindsey, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jared. It's great to be here.
For sure. And I just want to share with the audience a quick story about how Lindsey and I met. For those who've been following Healthcare Huddle for a while, I'm talking since the beginning of this year, I wrote about this topic in March, I think, about how these digital health companies have raised millions of dollars, and they have all these claims on the website saying, oh, we will increase your return on investment by 20%, but there's really no evidence or proof that the digital health solution will actually do that. So Lindsey read the article, reached out to me and said, hey, can we grab coffee and chat about this? So we had a great discussion about it. And at the time I was planning for my virtual events for the rest of 2023. And I said, Lindsey, this would be a great topic to discuss. Can we do, a virtual event in August, which we're in now? But little did I know that Lindsey was joining the Peterson Health Technology Institute, which would launch in July, which serves as this, again, independent evaluator of digital health companies. So it's very good timing. That's all I'll say. Okay, before we get into the weeds of things, some housekeeping for everyone. Everyone's going to be muted. This will be recorded and posted on YouTube after. Emoji reactions are encouraged. My team will post a Slido link in the chat, which is where you can ask your questions. And at the end, we'll do the Q&A. And most importantly, stay curious. So first, we'll talk about digital health tech. Where is the evidence? Lindsey will shed light on the Peterson Health Technology Institute, and we'll discuss PHTI, the acronym for Peterson Health Technology Institute, in practice. So I first want to start off with a quote. And I recently read a journal article over the weekend by Silverman et al., which they were talking about a framework to use to evaluate digital health companies. And this was one of the quotes from the get-go. It said, while digital health holds promise, current practices in digital health have been described as the Wild West, with misleading claims being common and clinical evidence quality often poor. So before jumping into this, Lindsey, any initial reactions on this quote? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah, I think that it describes it quite well. I actually think that piece has a lot of interesting components to it. And my favorite part is that they mentioned that there's 78 different frameworks that actually try to assess the different quality and evidence that exist for digital health. So I think it speaks to a broader problem as well.
For sure. And I'll mention this later, but yeah, you're right. There's so many frameworks out there to assess digital health companies, but there's no organization or there's no one saying, okay, I'm going to be the one to do this, to implement these frameworks. So we'll get to that later. But for some context, I know a lot of you are in digital health and probably know all this, but in 2021, digital health funding skyrocketed because of the pandemic and venture capital, which is pumping money into the digital health space. total funding doubled from the previous year from 14 billion to 29 billion, like an insane amount of money. And thousands of digital health companies launched. Purchasers were very quick to basically find, quote unquote, the best digital health company, whether it be like telehealth, workflow companies, or like on-demand healthcare. And they acted quick to like buy into these because like care was remote. They needed a reliable telehealth company that had good return on investment. Was it true that they had good returns on investment? That's to be determined. But again, there wasn't enough time for digital health companies to really evaluate and validate their products, and purchasers didn't really have enough time to like sit back and think, oh, should we wait a year to invest in this or that? No, because the pandemic was happening now. So now we're at like this inflection point where digital health funding in 2022 basically came back to like the beginning of the cycle. So back down to 15 billion. It will likely be lower than this at the end of 2023. So funding is becoming scarce. If you've read the news, you've read my newsletter or Blake Madden's newsletter, who writes hospitality, you'll know that digital health companies are struggling to maintain contracts, and hospitals and other purchasers are reevaluating their contracts now that they're like up. These contracts that were formed at the height of the pandemic, and as these hospitals purchasers reevaluate, they're asking, of the thousands of digital health companies out there, the thousands of telehealth companies, which one will bring me the biggest return on investment? And so I'll end there for my screen sharing. And Lindsey, what are some like challenges these purchasers face when evaluating digital health companies?
I think great question to start off with. Just at the highest level, I think it's really overwhelming, the number of technologies that that are brought to them, which is really exciting, right? Like, let's take a second to acknowledge that technology has like the capability to bring a lot of improvements to the sector. And so they're looking for those technologies, but it's just overwhelming. So I think that they don't really know where to begin. Through my time as we've been building PHCI, we've talked to pretty much like over 100 different people who are making different purchasing decisions. And we tend to hear, we don't know where to start on evaluating these companies. There's a lot of different points of entry that are bringing them, like companies are coming to us. And so we don't have like a streamlined process for that. And there's no single source of information to validate the claims that these companies are making. And there's really just insufficient credible evidence that these companies are bringing to them. So all of that combined really makes it challenging for them to kind of say, yeah, we really want to go with this company. And to your point, it can be a long process. And throughout the past year or two or three, they haven't necessarily had as much time to make those decisions as they would have liked.
Exactly. And I think there's some like psychological theory of like choice overload. Like when you have too many choices to choose from, you basically become so overwhelmed and like you freeze. So I feel like this has been what's happening with digital health, and I will like applaud the digital health space for like being so quick during the pandemic to build all these solutions that are very useful. Whether they've been valuable is again to be determined. But then you said like there's been insufficient like credible evidence, and the claims on like digital health websites, which look beautiful, like how do you not believe them? And they'll cite like an internal study, but like no details on that internal study. And as someone who's in medicine, like I need to see what the population is, what the methods were. Because if you just use like a healthy cohort to evaluate your digital health product that's supposed to help patients with like cardiovascular disease, like it's gonna be so biased. And so
or the size,
right? It's like,
yeah,
if there's 15 people in your internal study, like, come on, that N is way too small. The power of that study is way too small.
Right. It doesn't work for the entire population. And, that's always going to be a challenge, but especially with sample size, that begins to be a really critical challenge.
Exactly. And I'm going to share this quote that I pulled from your website. one of my screens loading. There we go. So it said when a digital health tech company says certain outcomes will improve by 40%, what we need to know is, where did this math come from? How good is that underlying evidence? Which basically goes back to like exactly what we're talking about. It's like, okay, your internal study with 15 people in a healthy population, like, is that really going to mean a lot? And I wanted to highlight a Rock Health study that came out a couple years ago at this point, but I've used this in my articles. But to highlight like what they did, they basically analyzed 200 digital health companies that focused on like prevention, diagnostics, and treatment, and they assigned this like clinical robustness score, and this robustness score was like the sum of the number of clinical trials the company has running and like the number of like regulatory filings. This could like 510Ks, de novo, pre-market approvals. And I mean, I guess not surprising, but maybe somewhat surprising. This was like the distribution. And Lindsey, what was the number of digital health?
80% had little to no clinical evidence. Right.
So like 80%, like, again, I said that there were thousands and thousands of digital health companies that launched during the pandemic, and like 80%, if you can extrapolate like that, like don't really have clinical evidence. So like these purchasers are buying into companies that really don't have any validated findings, whether it be like clinical or economic. And so here's a distribution of the clinical robustness score. Over 10 is like amazing. I want to know who these companies are. But I think 60%, that was the distribution, had a score of 1 or less. So they only have like one clinical trial or like one 510K, one de novo, one pre-market approval, like in line. But again, like look, over almost 100 companies out of the 200 had a clinical robustness score of 0. And this like leads into the next question. It's like, well, why aren't digital health companies like testing their solutions?
I think it goes back to your earlier point. In the beginning, there wasn't really a need, not in the beginning, but over the past few years, right? There was less of an incentive for them to do it, right? And purchasers were, we need solutions, and so what can we purchase quickly? And then there's also the component of, people like to say, use it as a little bit of a, hey, I'm a health insurance company and we offer these solutions, or I'm an employer and we offer our employees all of these exciting benefits. And so it's multifaceted, right? Because companies want to get their solutions to market quickly, and then purchasers are also interested in it for a variety of reasons, right? In addition to patient care, in having those solutions. But in addition to that, right, into the mixed incentives, it also takes a lot of capital to develop that evidence. And as we've seen, some of that is slowing down. And so as money starts to slow down and dry out, there's a real question about where should we be spending our money. And right now, there's mixed signals about whether or not they should be spending that money generating that evidence. And then the third thing I'd say is time, which kind of plays into the first two that I mentioned, but it can take years to publish a clinical trial study, and even to actually just get one started could take years, right? To our conversation about ensuring sufficient population. So I think that the time is also important because, we all know that for like founders, being the first mover in a market is really important. And so you want to do what you can. If you can get to market as soon as possible, why wouldn't you choose that option? So you can't necessarily blame them.
No, exactly. It's like, I guess like the two things in life, like time and money, like it's always going to hurt. And, I imagine like if you are a digital health company, let's say like remote patient monitoring, and if you're in the hospital at home business and you say you integrate into Epic, for example. When I gave a shot at my first startup back in 2019, we tried to figure out how to integrate into Epic and found out it would cost millions of dollars. And that was it. We were done. And so for these like remote patient monitoring companies, for example, okay, they're gonna spend the money on integrating into Epic because they can't even get any market traction if they're not in the medical record. So like, why are you really going to spend that money and capital on validating your product, or do you do this on the fly, like with the excess capital that you have? And I think that's what digital health companies were like that was the decision they were facing as in a quick moving like pandemic environment. So like again, like you said, like I don't blame them.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, we could talk. There's a whole long list of other things that they are spending their capital on, and an interesting anecdote is that I've heard a lot through conversations that I've had is that actually coming into compliance for privacy and security is like quite expensive,
Really?
right? Like insurance in terms of like security and things like that, right? If you're going to integrate into different hospital systems, you're going to want to make sure that you have you're set up to appropriately handle that integration. So, like there's so many things like beyond that, cost a lot of money. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure that there are the right incentives to make sure that capital is going towards evidence generation.
Right. And then, sorry, I just want to add one more thing that you said before, but like funding is becoming scarce now with like, as we end the previous funding cycle. So like, again, like with the scarcity of funding, will digital health companies really want to throw that funding into like validating the product and like sitting back and, time and like, oh, let's wait until we have good data, but what if the data isn't good, right? Like I said, you could abandon the digital health building, but it's like sink or swim and like figure out the evidence on the way.
Yeah, and to kind of just segue into sharing a little bit about PHTI, if you don't mind. Our whole thesis is really if companies are generating solid evidence, they should be able to get to market faster and like use that as a way to say, hey, I have this evidence base, purchasers, let's talk, right? And so it should be used as this way to actually gain market momentum. And so thinking about it from that perspective, actually, it should be more of an incentive, right, than a disincentive to spend that time doing it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. So before we jump into PHTI, I know there's someone here who's gonna be like, whoa, if you make this digital health device, like you actually need market approval. And I recognize that. And we'll share this slide I made. But yes, like as clinical risk and technological complexity increases, you do need evidence, right? So like if you create a watch that can monitor heart rate and like detect arrhythmias and like tell you like, hey, you need to go to the emergency department because you're in VFib or something. Like you can't just walk into the digital health space and like say, here, like you need the evidence and you need to go through these regulatory followings that I mentioned previously. All right, and now without further ado, let's talk about the Peterson Health Technology Institute. So Lindsey, what is this brand new institute that I was thrilled to hear launch?
So PHTI is a nonprofit banner initiative of the Peterson Center on Healthcare, which falls under the umbrella of the Peterson Philanthropies, which broadly focuses on economic growth and high performance healthcare.
I should have made a graph.
Yeah. As somebody new to the Peterson family, it definitely takes the getting used to, but it's recent in July we launched, to your point, and we got a $50 million commitment from the Peterson Center on Healthcare to really drive this work forward, which is exciting because it just shows the commitment that Peterson is making towards this space. Basically, when I started working on this about a year and a half ago, we kind of brought this idea of like, there's so much digital health stuff, right? People just like to use the word stuff because like there are a lot of different categories that
I think I used it a million times throughout this chat already.
Yeah, and it's great. It's exciting. We should be excited about the innovation, but we just want to take a step back, right? Take a deep breath and then think about, okay, how can we raise the bar on the technology that is coming to market, right? We want to encourage people to really generate this evidence that we've been talking about has been missing from the system. So PHTI in the coming months is going to start putting out independent evaluations of different digital health technologies, and we'll be using data. And Jared is pulling something up. Oh, we'll be using company data and looking at all the evidence that they've put out to produce these assessments. And we're really hoping that these reports will help inform purchasing decisions and the overall adoption of high value healthcare. So we're really excited. And as Jared was just pulling up the timeline, I can just like walk it through, but we're going to be publishing our assessment framework in a few weeks now. So we're really heads down getting that finalized. And then we're putting out a roadmap, sort of, where we are and what's to come. And then in October, we'll be putting out the topics that we'll be focusing on for the first year. And then actually, we're going to be putting out some broader areas that we're going to focus for future assessments. And then in early 2024, we will be putting out our first assessments. So we are busy, but it has been really fun.
Yeah, that's great. So I was so excited to hear about this PHTI launch, and it received like great press. Like it was in Stat, it was in Healthcare Dive, it was in Healthcare Huddle. It was everywhere. So I'm looking forward to the growth of PHTI. And I just wanted to like solidify. So like who decided at Peterson to be like, we need to do this? Like, what was the impetus to like creating like, not just like a new project, but like this is a whole institution, right? So like this is like a big bet.
Yeah. That is a complex answer, but I'll just, if you think about healthcare spending overall, right? It's just like the percentage that of GDP just continues to increase. And as we saw in your graphs, technology is likely going to continue to add to that spending. And so we are really focused on just ensuring that the technology that comes to market is high value. So the reason we are, it's like such a sizable investment is because, it's just a really important, it's like, going to take years for us to make an impact. And like, there are small steps that we're going to take over the next few years, but it will take time to really listen to people and hear what the market needs and be able to respond and continue to engage and evolve our approach. But I think, one of the things that we've really focused on is other countries have this at the national level, and the US doesn't, right? And so that's one of the, you can't just have a small shop of people putting out assessments, right? Other countries, NICE in the UK, Germany's doing this. I think I just saw something about South Korea doing this. There's like a national group that looks at different digital health technologies, and every approach is different, right, that each country takes, but in the US there isn't that. And so there was kind of this gap that Peterson felt that we were able to fill, as you know, an organization, independent, nonprofit, that really is just fully focused on increasing value in the sector.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I forgot, like UK has one, Germany, and Germany, I think I read, like, I think because they're like evaluating these digital health companies, they've been able to like reimburse for like prescribing digital health companies in Germany, I think.
Yeah, so what they do, and I'm not an expert on German on the German system, so if other people have but if my memory serves, what they do is, if technology passes their criteria, then they basically say it's good enough that we'll offer it to the population and we'll reimburse for it. And so they are able to set a pretty high threshold, but in doing so, it allows broad access to that technology.
Nice. All right, so maybe a future application of PHCI for reimbursement of digital health solutions. One thing I want to bring up is like the core values of the Institute. And one of them that I'm a huge fan of is like transparency. So if I understand, like the framework you guys launch and the reports will be like available, like I could see them.
Yeah, you should see them. Everybody should see them. Yeah. Actually, not only the reports will be transparent, but our framework, like I mentioned, we're going to be releasing that in the coming weeks. But our whole point is, this is not meant to be a black box that we tell. Other organizations exist that in the space that are pay to play, and we're very much not trying to do that. And that's what makes Peterson unique and what allows us to be such a unique player in the space. So our goal is, by both being transparent, we're able to be fully open about our process, and it also will invite and encourage other experts to look at what we're doing and help us improve, or question us and help us learn and grow together, right? This is something over time, and also as the space evolves, right, we are going to have to evolve with it. And so we're excited to engage people along with us along the way.
Yeah, of course. And I think if there's one thing healthcare needs, is increased transparency into like everything from the drug supply chain to now this. So I just want to call that out. Like, I think it's great that transparency is like part of that core value. And like a question that I think people will have is like, what will be like the initial digital health areas that Peterson will focus on? Because again, like you said, like there's so many different areas. Like I mentioned telehealth, I mentioned like remote patient monitoring, but like you can't really tackle them all at once. Like you got to start small and then go big. So like what will be for Peterson?
More to come. But broadly, to your point of like, how are we defining stuff like this digital health technology stuff? Right. So for the first, initially we're going to be focusing on technologies that have direct clinical impact. And, to your point, that could be remote patient monitoring, chronic care management, different virtual care. So, it's definitely no small number that we have ahead of us, but it's exciting and allows us to really explore different spaces.
Right. All right, good, nice. And I know you can't talk much about the framework, but like even at like a high level, from like I saw on the website, like you're focusing on like clinical aspects, like user experience. Like, so what else will you guys be looking at?
I've mentioned that over the past few months, we've been having conversations with different stakeholders in the space. And through this conversation, we've heard really what questions people are asking when they're themselves evaluating or like thinking to purchase different digital health technologies.
Right.
And those really fall into three main buckets. To your point, clinical information, economic impact, and then, the context of the technology, thinking about like the broader context of the company. That came up a lot actually after pair therapeutics stuff happened. And then, just generally the competitive landscape for the technology, right? Like what other companies or technologies exist that are in the similar space.
Right.
But I can elaborate on the clinical and economic a bit more.
Sure.
So for the clinical component, we'll be looking at things compared to standard care.
Oh, okay.
Because, if we're replacing or adding digital technology into standard care, the whole premise is that it should be better for patients, right? It should be worth their while. And so with included in that is, user experience, accessibility, health equity, things like that. And then we have the economic component, which is really a question of, is this technology a mechanism for greater efficiency, right? And so does it cost equal or less than the current standard care? So that will just be another category that we'll be looking at.
I think it's great that there's a focus on health equity, because as we know, I think the what's the organization called? Whatever, the organization that the Commonwealth Fund that evaluates, U.S. compared to all the other advanced nations. We're United States is like last in equity. It's last in like all these things that you're evaluating. So it's gonna be nice to like really incorporate health equity into this framework. So it'll be exciting to see. And I'm looking forward to seeing more details about the framework. And I'm very happy that, 76 whatever frameworks out there now, but like now we're actually going to implement it, and now we're actually going to start viewing and analyzing and putting it to use. So very excited about that. So moving from, I guess, the background on the Peterson Health Technology Institute towards like what will look like in practice. How do you see, sorry, I'm looking at my question, but who do you think will benefit most from Peterson Health Technology Institute? Like, is it builders, purchasers, both? Because I imagine that if I'm building a digital health company and I see this very reputable institution say like, here's the framework we're using, like I'm going to follow it. Like I'm writing like I did in middle school with my book reports. Like I want the A, like I'm going to follow it. And usually if you follow the rubric, your project ends up being pretty good. So who do you think will benefit most, if not both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both and, right? I mean, not to be too idealistic here, but hopefully it could be the whole ecosystem of digital health, right? Including patients, investors, developers, purchasers, policymakers, even, right? Like these, the framework has implications for everyone, right? The purchasers are making purchasing decisions on behalf of patients, right? And so we can't forget that component as well. But just to like go into the two that you mentioned, I think that you're absolutely right. Like developers, our goal is that we can help them like think about what type of evidence they would be helpful to generate, right? What are purchasers going to be asking for, right? Knowing some of that information might allow them to streamline the evidence that they generate. Not streamline, that might be a bad word, but prioritize. And then also I think I mentioned this earlier, but if they do then generate that evidence, it allows them a clearer pathway to selling and engaging with purchasers. So that should provide a helpful path forward for them. And then for purchasers, right, like to the early part of our conversation, it's just fairly chaotic. And our goal is to help reduce the noise and to really just say, here are a lot of the questions that we've heard that people are asking. And we're actually going to be doing some site visits with different purchasers. And we have a purchaser advisory council with a number of health insurance companies and employers that are part of that group to help us understand at a more granular level how they're making some of these decisions, so that what we're putting out in the reports is actually helpful for people who are making the decisions.
Right.
So we're really just hoping to avoid report on desk and collecting some dust along the way.
Right. All right.
So,
I like that.
Yeah.
And then like last question before we open up to more questions, now cutting it close, but just personally, what has been the most challenging aspect so far? Trying to like navigate this space and create these frameworks. And what's been the most exciting part?
I think the challenging aspect has been the complexity. But at the same time, that has made it exciting. And I think it's allowed me to relate to a lot of these companies that we are going to be assessing, right? Because it's allowed me to understand, all right, as we're building this organization, there are so many decisions that we have to make along the way. And where do we prioritize our energy and our focus? And that's what digital health companies are doing themselves, right? They are having to make those decisions along the way too. So it's, I feel like that's allowed me some insight. And then the exciting part is just watching something grow, right? Like I have the email that we got when I first started working on this as a consultant. I got an email that was like something to the effect of, would you be interested in working on this? And I now have that framed, right? Like
Nice.
it's crazy to go from an email to execution and seeing it written up and having this conversation today. It just is really exciting. So
Very nice.
it's fun.
I like those answers. All right, so now we'll open up to questions. There's one question that's already been asked multiple times, and I think you were expecting it, but will there be a cost to participate from the builder's perspective?
No, that is a great question. Sorry, I had the chat off. I'm not realizing. So yeah, no, there will be no cost for anybody at any across this process. Builders will be engaged through a process that we're developing, but no, we're excited to engage people along the way. And actually, to that point, to our discussion earlier, if people are light on resources to develop the evidence, we don't think that that's a valuable way for them to spend money to then get evaluated or anything like that. So
yeah, I think we mentioned like the pay to play, like not happening.
Yeah.
Another question from, let me find it, from Rishi. How does PHCI foresee its efforts changing like purchaser decisions, like as a one-stop shop to make decisions, or more as like supplementary material?
We will definitely that's a good question. Let me say that. We'll be putting out the assessments, which will provide context on the evaluation of specific technologies, and will also include additional information that we recognize decision makers make decisions based off of a variety of different data points. But I think more broadly, as time goes on, there's a question of creating a conversation. And that, to the second part of your question, I think is, it's both detailed information, and then broader categories of what can we all do together to work towards a specific goal.
Great. And then last question, I think I can answer it, but there will evidently be like backlash, right? If you like don't view a company as well. So like, how are you guys preparing for this? And I think the answer is in the frame, like the transparency, like that value. Like if you're transparent about what you're measuring, like, can you really argue? And if one of the reports has like insufficient evidence, like, then that's a call to gather more evidence to show that your framework has worked. Am I correct in answering that?
Yeah, our goal is to invite the people and encourage conversation and discussion. Because if there are people who disagree or have questions, how can we talk about how we came to our conclusion?
Right.
And so I think you're spot on with that, Jared.
All right, great. All right, so that is a wrap. 12:45, punctual. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone else in the audience, thank you for your attention. Feel free to, I'm going to send out an email after this with like a YouTube link. Feel free to reply back with questions. And I could pass them off to Lindsey or answer them myself. But thank you for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your summer and stay tuned for more Huddled Chats. So thank you. See you, everyone.
Thank you.